It was beginning to get late, and Tony Foster stared at his computer screen. As a journalist, he was used to writing articles and meeting deadlines, but this afternoon the words had failed him. The article was boring, about some European treaty deal that he didn't know anything about, he didn't understand, and was not in the least bit interested. Also was the fact that his readers wouldn't be interested in the article either. Over the years, he had written too many of these documents, and rarely had any of them resulted in a reply or a comment. People were simply not interested in this rubbish. Perhaps some bored politics student studying in France might pick it up one day and include it in some student report. Beyond that, there was little hope that he was going to win any prizes for the boring rubbishes and employed to write. The European Union was simply not interesting to the majority of people unless it was about the shape of cucumbers or the relaxing of GSM roaming charges. The Brexit referendum had been another issue. Like many other British expats living in Brussels, the result had come as a complete shock. For hours after the result had been announced, he did not want to believe it. Thanks, Britain, he thought. You've just screwed up my life. The decision had been made. His career had been built on him being British and reporting on the European Union. Now that Britain was no longer a part of the club, what about him? What was he going to do? Being a British journalist in Brussels was no longer the career he dreamed of. He suddenly felt redundant, abandoned, betrayed. He suddenly felt a second-class citizen here in Brussels. I need a drink, he thought. Outside his office window, just behind the European Parliament building, he could see the people leaving their buildings and heading home, ready for the weekend. He read his article again. I need a closing paragraph, he thought, and then that will be done. That idiot of an editor can then have it, and I'm gone from here. He thought once again, turning his thoughts towards the article in front of him on the computer. Tony hurriedly finished the article, saved it, and then emailed it to the editor. If I get out of here fast enough, he won't be able to question it, he decided. Tony grabbed his jacket, picked up the half-open packets of cigarettes on the desk and headed for the door. It had gone past 5 p.m. and this was now his time. He had put enough hours in this dreadful office, and like a schoolchild suddenly been released from the classroom, he headed towards the elevator on his floor. He pushed the button at the side of the elevator and waited for the carriage to arrive. It arrived. The doors opened, and he rushed into the waiting compartment. Freedom at last, he thought as he pushed the button for the ground floor and waited for the doors to close. Outside the air was warm, the last rays of summer sunshine before the autumn comes, and once again Brussels will be shivering in the rain and cold winds that blow between the office buildings. He started walking quickly down the street and towards the Place du Luxembourg, just behind the main buildings of the European Union. The Grand de Sable was his usual watering place, a bar where he was well known and where he could sit outside and have a cigarette. He had given up smoking just before the last summer, but it was in an effort to impress some woman, and he'd done it on health grounds, and he wasn't seeing the woman anymore. He had lasted a whole 2 weeks without having a cigarette. Then an irritating day at the office, plus a ridiculously tight deadline, had forced him back on the cigarettes once again. This bloody job, he thought. This bloody town. These bloody people. They don't They'll be the death of me. Tony was in his late 40s and had been a journalist, working in Brussels for many years. Too many years. He'd been briefly married when he was living in England, but that was now history. A bitter divorce had left him cynical about women. He was still free from all that now, single, free, and living in a city that he loved and hated in equal measure. However, that freedom of being single at his age had allowed him to get to know a wide variety of people in the expat community. They were all oddballs, but in some shape or form they were dysfunctional, strange, a bit crazy. That's what being an expat in this city eventually does to you, he thought. He reached the bar and signaled to one of the waiters to bring him a beer. A large one. He needed a large one this evening. Not that Friday was particularly busy in the centre of Brussels. Many people had now left to go home for their respective families, either in Brussels or in other countries. As a single man, he didn't have those responsibilities, so he could do what the hell he liked with his time. Sometimes he would get a twinge of regrets. Perhaps it would be nice to have someone to go home to. Slippers by the fire, a nice warm meal on the stove, a glass of wine already chilled before he came home. A chance to unwind and relax. Fuck that, he thought. Been there, done it. T-shirt. I'm not doing that again, he thought to himself. A single life suited him. He had tried many times to start a relationship with a variety of women, but with not much success. He had work, and the majority, though, had not. And it wasn't his fault. Women just didn't understand a man like him. A free spirit, a thinker, a writer, a bon vivant. Still, here he was again, his favourite bar. The beer was cold and on tap, and he had a packet of cigarettes. Later on, there would be a few people he knew, regulars like him, ready to start the weekends, looking for something to do, people to meet. Friday, he thought. Start of the weekend. 2 whole days away from that office. What to do, though? He thought again. He knew a couple of friends would be staying in town, so that was okay. They were always good for a night out. Julie would be around as usual, fussing over everything, doing the washing up, cooking his meals. She was good at it, though. She was reliable. She was a girlfriend. She was there. That's how he liked it. He wasn't quite sure what she, Julie, saw in him. But she was always a friend, a buddy. Always there in time of need and always ready to tidy up after him. He had thought of making a pass at her, perhaps inviting her out for a meal, a date. He had turned away from that thought. Why spoil a perfectly good friendship with a woman in exchange for a relationship or marriage? Keep things as they are, that's the best solution, he thought to himself. What about female company for the weekend, though? He thought to himself as he sat at the bar. Sandra would probably be out as usual, drinking herself into a stupor. She had been a beauty in her day, but her husband had got tired of her, preferring a younger model. He had left her money, which she was rapidly going through due to her taste for gin and vodka and whiskey and anything else she could pour down her throat. Where she'd choose to spend her nights, though, and with who, that was a mystery to everyone. She, Sandra, had recently disappeared for a couple of weeks and then had quickly messaged Tony, quick SMS, nothing special, to reveal that she was slumming it in the south of France on a boat in a harbour with some Arab sheik, or someone had invited her onto his yacht. Anyway, this guy, right? He had promised to marry her, but at the end of the trip, she had found herself returning home overnight on the train from Marseille, alone, in the dark, back to Brussels. No chic, no yacht. C'est la vie. Now Claudia and her husband were always at the bar. They were a middle-aged couple who'd found themselves living in Brussels since the mid-1980s. Like any expat couple, he had been offered a job in one of the European institutions doing something. No one knew what, or even really cared. He was a paper shuffler. He was working at the commission. He was on a nice salary and only continued there because of the eventual pension he would receive. He was only there for the salary and for the money. That was his bonus. A comfortable retirement for all the mind-rotting, boring work he had to do for most of his life. For him, retirement couldn't come soon enough. Claudia, though, was a nice, friendly lady who was far more intelligent than her husband, but who had found herself being left alone at home all day with too much money and very little to do with her time. She filled her days with lunches and charity work and girlfriends and women who did lunch and played golf and ran an expat organization in the evening. Anything to offset the boredom and lack of direction in her life. Anything to make her life worth living. Her children were all grown up and moved away. They had everything they wanted. Now she, Claudia, was determined to enjoy life. What was left of it, anyway. Now then, there was Beatrice. Now Beatrice was something special, Tony thought. Divorced, rich, and very, very sexy. Sadly for Tony, she had not shown the slightest interest in this aging writer. This journalist who propped up the bar night after night. She was always good for a life, though. Beatrice, she was someone who simply didn't care anymore. Life was to be enjoyed. Sex was to be enjoyed. Good food and wine was what it was all about. She, Beatrice, was a modern woman. She had it all. A nice villa in Nice, skiing in the Alps, men when they wanted her, when she wanted them. Always she went her own way on her own terms. She was one of a kind. I need a woman like that, Tony thought. The beer arrived, and he drank most of it in one go. Lighting his second cigarette, Tony considered the possibilities for another weekend of fun in Brussels. There must be something to do, something to see. There always is something to do in this town, thought Tony, finishing off his beer.